Almost everyone at DECIEM has been involved in a major criminal activity. I'm gonna look at a lion.
Most of us lead ordinary lives. We get up, we go to work, we come home, we go to sleep, we get up again, and repeat. We may have friends and family, hobbies and interests that make our lives unique. But overall, most people, including myself, would say we live pretty ordinary lives. But that story is not this story. This story is extraordinary. This story is about the founding of the multi-billion-dollar company The Ordinary by an absolutely extraordinarily eccentric founder, Brandon Truaxe, and his co-founder, Nicola Kilner. It's about how Brandon nearly destroyed the company and how Nicola saved it. How this one beauty brand and the genius of the two founders changed the skincare industry forever. From how brands communicate about ingredients in their products to lowering prices, it even changed the way an entire generation of skincare lovers shop for products. In this first part of a two-part series, we are going to explore DECIEM itself. We'll separate fact from fiction and explore all of the brands that DECIEM tried and sometimes failed to launch before The Ordinary came out. But most importantly, we'll establish the history of the company and its founders so we can better understand why everything spiraled into chaos in early 2018. This is the extraordinary true story of The Ordinary, Part 1, and it's starting right now. If this isn't made into a full-length Netflix movie at some point, I will be sorely disappointed. And I'm not talking about a docuseries. I'm talking about a legit biopic movie. It is that intriguing. It is that twisty. The characters are so interesting, and it truly has the plot of a Netflix-worthy series. But unfortunately, I'm just a mom in my basement, and I don't have the funding, resources, or writing ability to create something like that. So I'm going to do my best today to tell you the story the best way that I know how, through research and screenshots and video clips and all of the details behind this truly extraordinary story. I watched all of this go down in real time, but as is typical, I didn't know the full history of what came before. So of course, like I do, I've done the research, I've pulled it all together, and it's time to get started. As you may know, The Ordinary is one brand under a family of brands that's ever-changing, called DECIEM. The genius behind the concept of DECIEM was a man named Brandon Truaxe. He was an Iranian-born computer scientist, not a cosmetic chemist, not some kind of business professional, not an esthetician, not a dermatologist, but a computer scientist. And this is very important because Brandon approached all of his ventures in a very calculated, scientific way. Brandon was a problem solver, and a problem that he saw that really, to be honest, pissed him off was when he found out that the skincare industry was taking very inexpensive, very basic ingredients and charging premium prices for them. He compared it to like a pharmacy where you, let's say, have a headache and you know that Tylenol is the best medicine for you. So you go to the store and you know about how much Tylenol is going to cost. There's a generic, there's a regular, you decide which one you want, you purchase it, and it's really not that big of a deal. It's very transparent about how much Tylenol should cost. He felt like skincare should be the same way. If you want something for anti-aging, if you want something for acne, if you want something for hydration or moisturization of the skin, you should know about how much that costs to purchase. And it should be based on the ingredients included and the cost of those ingredients. Of course, what we know about the pharmaceutical industry, this isn't a one-to-one correspondence, but you kind of get the point. He thought that the cosmetic industry really truly needed to be more transparent. But being honest with himself, he didn't really know a whole lot about the skincare industry. He actually had started a company called ESHO that failed miserably, had a ton of debt, went into bankruptcy, ended up owing millions of dollars to investors, and needless to say, he didn't want to do that again. Another thing Brandon learned with ESHO was that just because you create something amazing, just because you create something that you fully believe in, that you know works, doesn't mean that a customer is going to pick it up off the shelf. And in that, if you invest fully in just one company, then the whole ship goes down. Because again, just because you think something's amazing and you know it works doesn't mean customers are going to buy it. And you don't know what customers are going to buy until it is out in the market and you just watch everything happen.
He told me he wanted to start something called DECIEM, which was from the Latin word for the number 10. It wasn't designed to be a beauty engine at that time. There was a beauty concept, but there was a technology concept, there was a food concept, so kind of just lots of different ideas generating, but with this viewpoint of doing 10 things at once.
I've got to say, this idea of doing 10 brands at once seems like it's counterintuitive to anything you might read in a business book that speaks to the importance of focus. Was there any sense in that, in your view?
So in actually our office in Melbourne, we used to have on the wall, focus is overrated, because everyone does tell you not to do 10 things at once. And actually, there were so many benefits to doing 10 things at once. So first of all, it was this viewpoint of trying to create this ecosystem of, how do we have our own manufacturing, do our own comms in-house? Because, and again, it takes funds to set up that ecosystem. But also, so many entrepreneurs, which I understand why they're in this situation, but so many entrepreneurs have to outsource everything. They go to the PR agency, they go to a lab, they go to someone to do your R&D. And then you're really just coordinating all of those efforts rather than, so it was a privilege we could build this whole ecosystem, because then at the table, everyone's sat there, everyone's generating ideas. And again, if I think around like doing comms in-house, it's a lot for one brand to pay, but if you've got 10 brands, suddenly you can look at it as 10% of everyone's salary. If I'm flying to Australia to meet a buyer, well, do I want to present one brand or do I present 10 brands? And also just this, area of, you don't know what's going to, until if you're in consumer brand, until it starts selling, you don't really know what's going to be. You can do all the research and all the insights in the world. Until something gets traction, you don't really know what's going to work. So it also just set up this incredible structure that we could fail. We could keep trying things. We could fail relatively cheaply, quickly, and kind of start the next thing.
And out of that, the concept of DECIEM was born. The idea of launching 10 brands all at the same time. But this is where, in the media, ideation became history and fiction became fact. Because as I was digging into this, what I realized was that the 10 brands that Brandon planned to launch in the beginning never actually happened. He never ever did launch 10 brands at once. And I've watched a bunch of interviews with Nicola Kilner, who was Brandon's co-founder. And when she's presented with the fact that DECIEM launched 10 brands at once, she just doesn't correct people, because that's actually not what happened. That's not to say that 10 brands didn't coexist at once, they just didn't launch at the same time. What Brandon did have at launch was 10 concepts of brands, but he only launched actually with one brand, and it wasn't The Ordinary, it wasn't even Naiad, and this brand actually doesn't even exist anymore. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Before we can get too deep into DECIEM, we need to go back a little bit further and get some more information on Brandon Truaxe himself. Don't worry, there won't be a test later, but it will be important. Brandon was born with the birth name Ali Rashan in Tehran, Iran on June 19th, 1978. And strangely enough, that's exactly 11 days before I was born and exactly 4 years before my husband was born. Isn't that weird? I know that's completely irrelevant to the story, but I think that's so odd. The same year I was born and the exact same day my husband was born. Very strange. Maybe that's part of the reason why I'm so fascinated with Brandon. Maybe there's some kind of like astrological link. Anyway, public facts about Brandon's childhood are shaky at best. All we know for a fact is that it was tumultuous. The first Gulf War started in 1980 and it ended in 1988. At some point, there was a rumor that Brandon's family moved from Iran to Cyprus to flee the war. After Brandon's death in 2019, there were pictures from his childhood that resurfaced. And in those pictures, you can see Brandon as a very young child, but those pictures abruptly stop when I estimate Brandon was probably around 5 years old. It is clear that somebody really wanted to remember this time, and I imagine it was Brandon's mother, because what we know about Brandon's mother is that she passed away around when Brandon was 5 years old, and then we have this giant hole in the pictures. For reasons unknown to me, Brandon's father ended up moving back to Iran, and it seems he left Brandon behind. Now, I did look a little bit into Iranian culture to see whether this would be something that would be culturally accepted or how this would fit into Iranian culture, and this would have been very frowned upon in the 1980s Iranian culture because the father was seen as the primary breadwinner, the one that took care of the family. It was his responsibility to make sure the family was okay, but also in that the father was typically very disconnected from his family. It was the mother's job to nurture and truly care for the children. The father was the breadwinner. And this is not unusual in cultures around the world. So if the mother passed away, what I read was that typically the children would then be taken care of by female family members, aunts, grandmothers, people like that.
My family sort of had a lot of medical problems in the beginning, and so I was adopted by a very close friend's family, and then parts of that family didn't want to adopt me, parts of it did, and the parts that did also ended up having medical problems. So it was a bit dysfunctional overall, but actually, I mean, I was blessed to have the support of obviously a lot of people to help me get through it.
The next time we hear about where Brandon is when he's about 15 or 16. He's now in Canada, and he lived in Canada for the rest of his life. He was very, very proud of his Canadian citizenship. He absolutely loved living in the Toronto area. Brandon would eventually attend the University of Waterloo as a computer science major, and in that, fate would lead Brandon to an internship with a cosmetic company. It was a job at a cosmetic lab in New York City, of all places, and his job was to look at ingredient regulations of all things. He had to look at the company formulas for compliance issues. He later told Nouveau magazine, quote, "They just launched a cream for $1,000 and I was making $200 a week, and I thought, my God, what could be in this cream?" Brandon had to know. He was so curious. So he looked into it and he found that the $1,000 cream was being manufactured for about $2.
You know, the world is very imperfect. In fact, everything in the world is kind of just, the perfection of the world is the fact that everything is very imperfect and nothing is in your control. In the world of computers, it was really beautiful because it was a perfect world. It was a fabricated world, but you could actually devise anything and it would always do, you know, what you told it to. And we're building a software system that would look at the kind of regulatory requirements or chemical interactions of all the chemicals that are used in the formula. That I just didn't understand why something that may cost so little can cost so much to buy, and then vice versa, something that costs much more would actually end up selling for less in the same group of products. So a cleanser that may cost $5 was only $30, but in the same group, a cream that might be $2 is like $200. It didn't make any sense to me. What really made sense to me is that the consumers, which I actually largely blame for this whole phenomenon, has just been brainwashed in that they don't even really want to listen. They don't even want to understand what it is. It's just you're not even selling a hope or a dream. You're just simply paying to be further brainwashed.
And with his scientific puzzle-solving brain, this just did not compute. And he's like, this cannot be right. There's something seriously wrong here. He realized that what was happening wasn't actually about what was in the product. It was about how they could market it. Brandon graduated in 2001, and in that same year, he left the internship. But he didn't go directly into cosmetics. He actually started a software development company. It was called Schemat Corporation, and at some point, he sold it. I don't know for how much. There is a rumor that there was a second tech company, but I personally couldn't find it. And then came the now defunct Yuoko skincare line. It was actually very similar to DECIEM's brand now called Niod, except for it was extremely expensive. And how they justified the price and what he did with this was he decided if he was going to charge ridiculous prices for a cream, he was going to make sure that it had the most exotic, expensive, best ingredients possible in this cream. He was going to pack it full of the highest concentrations of these extremely expensive ingredients and really make it worth it for customers if they were going to spend that kind of money on skincare. But instead of like $30 to $50 a bottle, it was like $500 a bottle. Records show that in 2006, Brandon invested about $400,000 into a shell company. But with his business partners, he had decided he was going to turn Yuoko into a competitor for companies like La Mer and SK2. And in true Brandon Truaxe style, 2 years into development, they launched 25 products. The categories were radiance, acne, anti-aging, protection, and whitening. What he felt like was going to make Yuoko stand out was, again, these ingredients that he sourced from what he called exotic locations like Switzerland and the Amazon rainforest. In 2008, he did an interview with W Magazine. He said, quote, "I thought if consumers are willing to pay so much money, why not consider every ingredient out there regardless of raw material cost?" And they cost a lot. So for example, the SKUs on their key products is what they called them, like the Intense Lift Concentrate, that was $500. The Cell Energy Radiance Cream was $170. And the Blueprint Resculpting Cream was $180. They had key ingredients, things like Kalahari watermelon extract, okra seed extract, and an ingredient that they said actually mimicked the chemical structure of snake venom, and then it would act like Botox on the skin. And Yuoko did have legs to it. They sold Yuoko in 10 different countries. They focused mostly on specialty stores, salons, and barbershops in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. But they did have bigger dreams, and that was mass retail. In 2008, they got a 5-year, $3 million Canadian loan from a company called CMMG Finance Inc. It was this investment that got them built to the point where they could have their products in Bergdorf Goodman. A woman named Patricia Saxby was vice president and divisional merchandise manager for cosmetics and fragrance at Bergdorf Goodman at the time. And before accepting the brand, she was like, well, I need to try these and I need to let some of my friends try them. So we need samples. So she gets the samples. She hands them out to friends. She told W Magazine, "I've never had people call me so quickly to tell me that after a couple of days they saw changes." And it was very refreshing to have somebody like Brandon, who really didn't grow up in the industry, but who had such a passion for it that he just went out and built his dream brand. But even with these amazing ingredients and potentially amazing effects, Brandon and Yuoko had a big problem. And the big problem is there's only so many people in the world that can afford to buy a $500 serum. And not just purchase the $500 serum, but repurchase it. And with the sourcing of those ingredients and the research they were putting behind to make sure that the ingredients were actually working, Yuoko quickly went into debt. But Yuoko had a strategy. They were not giving up yet. They started putting their products in the hands of the rich and famous. In some public legal documents that I was able to find, it stated that Yuoko participates in key fashion and entertainment events in various capacities. Historically, Yuoko's products have been featured in a celebrity goodie bag at the Academy Awards, in celebrity welcome bags at the Bryant Park Hotel during Fashion Week in New York, and at other industry events within North America. But unfortunately, this didn't seem to help, and Yuoko was purchased in March of 2008 for only $145,000. I went deep in the weeds on this, but I'm going to try to sum up for you because I found out that it really isn't all that fascinating. It's kind of interesting though, so and it speaks to Brandon's character in that when they sold, somehow, Brandon and his business partner ended up with almost all of the shares of the company. And I don't even know how that works when the company wasn't publicly traded. Supposedly, Brandon and his partner Julio were granted 99.6% of the shares of the company, which gave them basically full control over everything that was happening at Yuoko. I am not a business person. I have a very surface level knowledge of how all of this works. So maybe it was publicly traded and I just couldn't find it, or maybe there's shares that work some other way. I don't know. But anyway, what you need to know is that Brandon and his business partner were in control of everything, but they weren't making all of the money. And the reason why you've probably never heard of this brand is because Brandon and Julio were not able to save it. By December of that year, Brandon wasn't even being paid anymore, and the company had to give Brandon permission to go get another job. So he was still working for Yuoko, essentially for free, trying to save the company, but he had to get another job to pay his bills and put food on his table. The only clause in the contract that Brandon signed was that he had to work for a company that wasn't a direct competitor. He could work in the skincare industry, but the price of the products had to be less than $100. Enter Indeed Laboratories, which you may have heard of because they actually do still exist. If you're in the US, you can head over to the Ulta website. They actually have 23 products currently over on the Ulta website, including one that Brandon had a direct impact in creating called Nano Blur. It is a skin perfector cream that they say instantly blurs and mattifies the skin, minimizing the look of enlarged pores, shine, wrinkles, and crow's feet. But what's interesting about Indeed Labs is if you Google Indeed Labs and you go to their website, there's no mention of Brandon anywhere. You can tell the way that it's worded that Brandon's in there, but they don't talk about him directly. And that's because there was drama there. There was an interview published with Demetra Davidson in April of 2024, and she is listed as the only founder of this company. If you read the article though, you can totally tell that the brand ethos was right out of Brandon's playbook. It says, Indeed Labs was born out of a need rather than an inspiration. There was frustration with the lack of transparency in the industry and not being able to find the right products to treat a specific need. This sparked the concept of Indeed Labs. The word Indeed means in truth or in fact. The brand focuses on problem-solution skincare with transparency, educating consumers on the ingredients going into the products and focusing on results. Then it says, the brand's mission was to create products that deliver on their promise by focusing on clinically proven ingredients that are safe for consumers. It became obvious that affordable and accessible, results-driven products were not easy to come by, so Indeed Labs was launched to bring consumers everywhere good skincare at an affordable price. Again, we don't know exactly what happened with Indeed Labs. All we know is it went really bad, really fast.
It was so serendipitous because at that time, I met this gentleman by the name of Brandon Truaxe. I was already consulting, so I had already established my career. My background is in finance. I had a need. I had gone to a dermatologist, and I had some hyperpigmentation from my pregnancy. I couldn't get rid of it. My dermatologist prescribed hydroquinone. I looked it up and I was too afraid to use it. And I met Brandon Truaxe, who said that he had been working for a skincare brand. He was a computer guy, and we had this conversation. He said, I want to start a skincare brand because do you know what's going on behind the scenes? And I said, no, I don't. But actually what I know is that I have a need.
Right.
So, Brandon and I kept in touch, and I kept saying, can you make something for this? Because I've gone to the drugstore and I can't find something to help treat this. And nobody seems to know what ingredients are in products. except for my doctor, my dermatologist, but I don't want to use what he has prescribed. It sounds scary to me. And so I think it was through those conversations that we decided to launch a skincare brand to have products made affordable and accessible to consumers everywhere, and to really dive into the science of the products and the ingredients that go into them. But I really believe that it was through those conversations. I never expected to be in the skincare business. It was this person that was so excited about this opportunity, and me selfishly going, okay, well, that sounds great because I'm a consumer.
Yeah.
And I had an expertise to help build strong teams. So what I did was on behind the scenes. We built the lab, we hired our teams, and Brendan was the front end marketing genius.
How do you reflect on that now? What do people maybe not know as an outsider?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. It took me a really long time to process, to reconcile in my mind. You obviously, his untimely passing was it for somebody like myself. I met him when he was 29 years old, put a lot of faith in him. It was shocking, and it was too soon for a marketing mind, a genius like that. Hard to reconcile, because just like a lot of people in Brandon's path, he left us hurt. Me and our business partners, and especially me. So it took me a long time, and I say especially me because I took on this burden I felt at the time and responsibility that I was supposed to take on with a partner. I wasn't supposed to be in front of the brand.
Right.
But it was a huge investment. At the time, I had raised capital through my networks to help our expansion across the United States. I've actually never spoken candidly about this. And I think it's time, because it was really, really hard for me to not be upset at somebody.
Yes.
Especially in their very untimely passing.
Yes.
Right.
And then also in my mind to give myself the confirmation that I was meant to be here. And it took me a couple of years. It took me a couple of years to get my footing, to go through pain, to also go through like the skepticism. And you didn't start this brand, Brandon did. To stand here and say, yeah, that was really early on. I took on a challenge that most people would have run away from.
Yeah.
I took it on head on. I learned everything that I needed to learn in the industry. I worked tirelessly to the point where I even sacrificed being a mom sometimes, on the road constantly. And it took me a while to just sit there in my own accomplishments and the accomplishments of Indeed Labs and say, today, 61 awards later, the brand may have started by Brandon's idea, and our foundation and the ethos of the brand still exists to this day, why we started and why we launched in the industry. But to be able to identify and embrace the fact that if it wasn't for Brandon, I don't know what my life would have looked like today.
Right.
He put me on this course.
Yeah.
And I value and appreciate.
Yeah.
I miss sometimes, that opportunity to go, like, Brandon, what do you think?
Right.
Like, for a long time, I felt like I could feel his presence.
Yeah.
I feel like he's rooting for Indeed Labs,
Yeah.
because this was his baby.
Right.
This was what put him on the map. He put me on this course. I learned a lot in terms of, disruption, because that was Brandon.
Yeah.
I also learned a lot about credibility, about honesty. There were other aspects and other things that weren't there, which is why we severed ties at the beginning. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
It's a really long one.
Yeah.
But I'm good. I'm good at knowing that I honor what he brought in my world.
Yes.
And take all that goodness from it. So we together, I think we started this, I know we started down this journey, and it took me a while to embrace, this is mine.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was so many products came after
Yeah.
Brandon, but I do have to honor his memory in the sense that not only did he change my world, but he changed all of our worlds in the skin,
Yes.
and young consumers.
Yeah.
Yes,
Consumerism in
absolutely.
general.
Total disruptor.
Absolutely.
Total, absolute disruptor.
Major milestone in the beauty industry, and we were talking about this off the mic, that we've been around for so long and seen it all evolve. So he was definitely pivotal in that. But we also know that we've seen so many brands where the founder leaves and everything just starts to fall apart. And that didn't happen with Indeed Labs. It's 15 years later, and there's an evolution, which we're going to get into in today's episode. So, but I think it's great that perspective allows us to come to a place where we can just see things better in hindsight and be able to acknowledge, just see it for what it was. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Brandon was co-founder of this company, and he did an interview with a woman named Cheryl Wishover. And she says that she was very much involved in the back end of DECIEM when it was first starting, and that she knew Brandon very well. And in the article that was published in March of 2020, it's called DECIEM Fueled the Skincare Boom, Then It Almost Went Bust. In that article of Indeed Labs, she says, I used to talk to him about these former business ventures, but he was always vague. People who work with him during this period won't go on record to talk about those years. Brandon also talked about this time to cosmetic business. The first time I saw Brandon's honesty coming out was right here in this quote. He says, I exited my previous business, Indeed Labs, with a lot of anger and a non-competition in face care, a combination of passion for bringing credibility to the functional beauty business and the revenge overly due to Indeed Labs led to the formation of DECIEM. A million mistakes later, and now we're here.
Because I'd received a note from basically my partner that over a very small issue, and it was just the last straw is always a straw. That's the issue with this, is that it's never a big bomb at the end. And I just left. I remember I walked out of the gate. I came back in, and I looked for just a next flight somewhere I hadn't been that I could just be peaceful about it. And I boarded the plane. I'm really not joking. I just basically left, and for 3 months I sat down, reflected. So I decided to go all around Mexico, and but it was really good, because it was just it was really peaceful, actually.
While Brandon was working for Indeed Labs, he met someone that was going to be very important in his life and in the life of DECIEM, Nicola Kilner. Unlike Brandon, Nicola grew up in a very loving home with 2 loving parents.
Because mum stayed at home, so she did do the cooking, the cleaning, and just a very caring, she's just with my children today, and it makes me so happy because I know what kind of mum she was, and just knowing that love that they're going to have. My father was very great sense of humour, always very playful, very inspiring, very charismatic, always had kind of big ideas, kind of high energy.
But it wasn't a picture-perfect family. Unfortunately, when Nicola was a young adult, she lost her father to alcoholism. She said in an interview that until she was 18, her dad didn't hardly drink at all. It was mostly like a social thing. But then he lost his job as a radio DJ. And when that happened, he turned to drinking in order to cope. For 2 years, Nicola watched her father descend into alcoholism, and he eventually passed away in 2009. Nicola watched how hard her parents were working daily, and she had an idea of that she wanted a different and better life. She wanted to essentially bust her ass when she was young so that she could eventually retire, have a family, and just live off the money she made in her 20s, which sounds pretty freaking ideal.
You always just had this feeling that actually the only way to really achieve financial freedom is probably through entrepreneurship in some way. So I always kind of had this dream of almost just doing something of my 20s, kind of making all the sacrifices to build up enough freedom that then actually going on to have a family, I could make the choices to really spend my time where I wanted to.
She took courses in business management, and in those courses, they provided internships, and she did an internship with Boots. And if you're in the US, it's kind of the UK version of CVS. And Nicola loved working at Boots.
So I came across this course, which was business management in company, which is quite a unique course, which was at Nottingham Trent University. So it's sponsored by different blue chip companies. So Rolls-Royce, Boots, Barclays, Tesco's, companies like that. They take on 40 people into this course. We would work 4.5 days a week for whichever company are sponsoring us. And then the other half day was kind of our study time, although obviously there was much more than that. And actually we'd go, so I chose Boots. Well, we went through interviews. Boots was my first choice, and I was lucky to get there.
But there was a big problem in working for such a big company in that she felt like she couldn't make the kind of impact that she wanted to make because she was just a little fish in a very, very big pond.
Depending on the kind of person you are, if you go to a big corporate, it's so difficult to impact the culture there because there's just so many people, there's so much history. And if you are someone who's kind of got this strong drive to make a change, then, entrepreneurship, I think, is just an incredible area. And even if it's not your idea, but going to join a startup is just incredible energy.
She had all these ideas and all of this passion and all these things she wanted to do. And she knew she couldn't do that with a huge company. And that inspired her to want to start her own company. But we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet because we got to get Nicola and Brandon meeting first. So she finishes her internship with Boots and they love her so much that they actually offer her a job. And she becomes one of the youngest buyers in Boots history. And if you're not familiar with a buyer, essentially their job is to look at companies. So the company wants their products sold at Boots. It was Nicola's job to look at the products and decide whether they were a good fits for the Boots customer. If she decided that it was going to be a good fit, it was her job to then help the company to market their products in the store, to figure out what the gondola was going to look like, how big it was going to be, what was the setup going to be, how would they market it to customers.
When I graduated, I then stayed on and I was an assistant buyer to begin with, and then I got promoted to be a buying manager for them, which was really around relationships. It was about collaboration. It was about looking around the world, seeing new technologies, finding the innovation, new brands, and then really hand-holding those, which mainly were entrepreneurs, to come into Boots to actually show them, look, this is how we could launch. We had a stand, it was called Latest Finds. We would launch a new innovation for a period of 3 months as a trial to see if it would work. Would Boots consumers like this? If it did, they would get a listing with Boots kind of long term. And that just really suited my skill set because it was a very entrepreneurial role. Because actually, I very much guided them with PR agencies and actually how to build the plan. And, we used to have this saying of like launch and love, because actually it's one thing to get a listing at Boots. It's another thing for your product to actually be picked and taken off the shelf.
Because the whole goal of any product in any store is sales. When the products sell, it's good for both the brand and for Boots. So like I mentioned earlier, how Brandon and Nicola met was because Brandon was working for Indeed Labs and Indeed Labs had their products selling in Boots. Nicola said in an interview that she felt an immediate connection with Brandon even before she met him, that he would send out emails and there was just something quirky about his emails that she absolutely loved.
You couldn't check your emails when you left the office. So often every morning I'd come in and I was dealing with a lot of international entrepreneurs. So I'd always come into like an inbox full of emails. And I always remember like looking for his name because his email was always so full of energy. He always signed it off, Smiles, Brandon, just someone whose positivity, his passion just kind of really shone through, that I'd always go straight to his emails, kind of open it. And, the launches that we did with Brandon and Indeed Labs were some of the most successful we did through the innovation program. And he was just, when he used to come to the Boots head office in Nottingham, it was bouncing off the walls with kind of this infectious energy. And I remember just from the day I met him thinking, gosh, I always want this person in my life, because he just had this aurora and just someone who you knew wanted to actually also make the world a better place and kind of really cared about doing good and doing things differently.
So yeah, like we talked about, again, in 2012, Brandon abruptly leaves Indeed Labs and he wants to start something new. That's when he gets the idea for DECIEM to launch those 10 brands at once. Through the magic of the Wayback Machine, which is a fabulous tool, I was able to find the original DECIEM website with all of the original brand names. Here is the list of the original 10 DECIEM concepts. Aviston, SXE, Raw Engine, XB, Loofah, Powder, Hair Apothecary, Knob, Upper, and Diverted. Some of these names will come back later, most of them will not. Actually, in just 2 months, the lineup of the 10 brands changed. So they ditched SXE, Knob, and Upper. I still don't know what any of those were. And they're replaced with LHN, Gibri, and Edible. Powder has also evolved to Powder Labs, and it appears to be a personalized fitness nutrition product. But the one that seems to be the focus, the brand that is going to make DECIEM stand out, you will not believe this. LHN. It stands for Look Hot Naked. This is freaking real, man. Look Hot Naked was a clothing line for, quote, those who want to get more out of wearing less, who aren't afraid to take a chance and want to stand out from the crowd, specifically developed to make you look and feel sexier. In early 2013, the first brand to actually launch from DECIEM hits their website, and it wasn't The Ordinary, it wasn't even Naiad, it was a product called Inhibitif. They launched the brand in April, and they launched it exclusively at Boots. Was Nicola Kilner the one that got Inhibitif into Boots? I would guess probably so. But what was Inhibitif, you may ask? It was topical hair removal without waxing, shaving, or laser treatments that were said to slow down hair regrowth over time, making hair less noticeable and reducing the frequency of hair removal procedures. There were serums, there were sprays, there were creams. There was a deodorant designed for both body and facial areas. In my opinion, I think that's a pretty cool concept. The other two brands that looked like they were making the most progress toward launch were LHN and Avistan. They both had websites that had these really cool trailers for the products. LHN was very naked themed. It showed a scene of a man and a woman walking down the street, and then they notice each other, and then flash to them getting intimate, and then more intimate, and then even more intimate, and then they're back on the street, and they stop, and they look at each other, and then fade to black. I'm so curious what you think of that. Is that appealing to you? I was kind of like, it's definitely different. I'll give it that. I don't know if this would have sold me product, but it definitely caught me off guard and made me go, what? This is an ad for a company? It really was. I'm actually going to play the Avistan trailer in full because I think it's so cool. It's kind of ASMR like. Avistan was their fragrance company. Here's the text from the website, and I'm going to read it to you because I think it's so interesting. This is what it said. Avistan is a journey to create new meaning through scents. It is a departure from lavender and rose to an unfulfilled journey of unfamiliar notes, clays, stems, saps, places and moments. Avistan is indeed an avant-garde play on nature, one that disallows the mind to identify but creates instead a welcomed occasion to explore. Welcome to Avistan. By November, DECIEM wasn't 10 brands, it was 15 brands. This is because they added in 2 additional brands called Grow Gorgeous and hand chemistry. Keeping with the timeline, 8 months after the launch of Inhibitif, DECIEM gave UK customers their own hair care line in Grow Gorgeous. It launched on July 26th of 2013, and it focused on hair growth and hair density. The company is still in operation today, but it isn't owned by DECIEM anymore. More on that later. I regret to say I couldn't find the exact month and year when Nicola and Brandon became DECIEM together, because before this, Brandon was working with a whole different team of people, but at some point he ditches most of that team, at least some of that team, and brings Nicola on. Here's another clip from the interview that I showed earlier.
He suddenly left Indeed Labs. Now, Indeed Labs, he founded it. It was a rocket ship. It was kind of doing super well. And I remember getting this message from him that he left and just being like shocked, as in like, what has happened? So then when he was next in London, I met up with him. And obviously he told me about his reasons for leaving. He was going to do this next thing. And I'd always kind of had this viewpoint of wanting to do my own business. And ever since I worked in beauty, I found that, I always had friends, family, everyone asking, what's the best mascara? What's the best foundation? And just how we'd go to TripAdvisor, to look at kind of ratings and reviews for restaurants and hotels. I wanted to create the same thing for beauty that actually ranked the products. So I told Brandon my idea and said, I want to do this. What do you think? Do you have any advice? He told me he wanted to start something called DECIEM, which was from the Latin word for the number 10. It wasn't designed to be a beauty engine at that time. There was a beauty concept, but there was a technology concept, there was a food concept, so kind of just lots of different ideas generating, but with this viewpoint of doing 10 things at once. So we said, why don't you come and help do DECIEM with me, and I'll help do the beauty, we went on to call it Beauty Wise with you. So then obviously I made the decision to leave Boots, which obviously I was at the age of 23, 24. And I remember telling mum, and everyone's like, oh, you're in a really good business, you've got a good, you're already achieving things. But I just knew that I wasn't meant to be there forever. So I left 10 years ago, and then it was the start of DECIEM.
So Nicola leaves Boots, and the two of them work together to build DECIEM, the abnormal beauty company, co-CEOs. But neither of them had a ton of money to do all of the things. All of their financial backing seemed to come from a relatively unlikely source because it was nobody in the cosmetic industry. It was actually a Canadian jeweler named Pasquale Cusino. He was a prominent Canadian entrepreneur and jeweler. He was the founder of 2 luxury jewelry brands, one based in New York and one based in Toronto. The importance of Pasquale being part of the early days of DECIEM is that Pasquale happened to be very good friends with a very important man named Leonard Lauder, aka the guy running Estee Lauder at the time. But again, we're not quite there yet. Just remember that there is a connection there this early on. Looking at the two of them, at Brandon and at Nicola, anything on the outside, anything surface-wise, they look kind of like an odd pairing. But the two of them had the same passion for transparency, for the beauty industry, for creating amazing products. And the biggest thing they had in common was their ability to think outside of the box and to appreciate that thinking outside the box was going to be the key to their success. They needed something different, something disruptive, something that no one else had done before in order to stand out in the market. Nicola said that Brandon had this analogy he would talk about where he wanted DECIEM to be the rabbit in an industry full of elephants, looking for holes in the market. The elephants, these big companies, these big corporations could only fit into holes in the market that were also big. So they were looking for those rabbit-sized holes, those little problems, those little things that they could do because they were small, that the big elephants could not do. And they chose the same hole that Brandon had been looking at with Yuoko, the transparency of ingredients within the skincare industry. We do know that Nicola was on board in 2014 because that year was was a huge year for DECIEM. They launched 4 more brands: the chemistry brand, Naiad, Fountain, and a brand called HIF, or Hair is Fabric. Eventually, the Inhibitif products ended up moving underneath the chemistry brand, and they were sold alongside products mostly for the hands and the body. Fountain was DECIEM's supplement company, but it wasn't just regular supplement pills, they were drinks. The different lines of drinks were called molecules, and the molecules that they sold the different products under were the look good molecule, the feel good molecule, and the be good molecule. HIF, or Hair is Fabric, ran on the idea that you should treat your hair like a textile. They said on their website at the time, "We approach hair care as we might with couture clothing. You wouldn't put couture in the wash, and why is hair any less important?" HIF was a professional grade hair care line that was supposed to be marketed to the masses. They had cleansing conditioners that included cleansing fractions rather than common detergents, as well as conditioning technologies, oils, hyaluronic acids, and rock extracts, which they say left the hair cleansed and in prime condition. And then there's one that you may have heard of, Naiad. Do you know what Naiad stands for? I did not know until I started doing this research. It stands for Non-Invasive Options in Dermal Science. So there you go. It became Brandon's reinvention of Yuoko, but at a lower price point. He packed the products full of active ingredients at the highest concentrations recommended, but he left the exotic, more expensive ingredients out of Naiad in order to keep the price down. Not to say that Naiad isn't still an investment. The products over there currently cost between $30 and $90 a bottle. Notably though, even though this is a higher price point, Naiad is the only brand left of these original companies that's still owned by DECIEM. Another important piece that I want to address in this section about building DECIEM as a brand is that it wasn't just about building up products and building up brands and making money and all of that. Brandon and Nicola both had the idea that they wanted DECIEM to be a family. The people that work there, he wanted them to be emotionally connected as a community.
We couldn't afford experience. So everyone who was hired was pretty much straight out of university, straight out of college, just applied for their first job. And actually that meant no one really had preconditioned ideas about the beauty industry, about the way things should be. Everyone was approaching it just with almost a very practical viewpoint. And I think that made a big difference too, with actually this, how do we think differently? How do we do what others aren't doing? It was almost never something that had to be discussed because people hadn't worked for the other conglomerates for all the years. He also had this, he had this philosophy. He wanted to build a family. He'd had, a troubled upbringing. I think he'd always, he'd actually had this pattern, I think, of always leaving a business when it kind of just went on the verge of success. DECIEM was his 4th business. He had a tech business and he had 2 beauty businesses, Yuoko, then Indeed, before DECIEM. And each time what hurt him was actually leaving the relationships and the people behind. So his viewpoint of DECIEM was actually, how do we build a family, like a work family? But I think it was never work. And I think that's what so many of us felt. Weekends, evenings, like we wanted to be doing DECIEM because we were all friends, we were all eating together, we were going to Niagara Falls on the weekend, we were going to a theme park in Toronto, like we were just having fun whilst we were doing everything. Yeah, so I think it was around building a family of, he never wanted anyone to leave him. And he wanted DECIEM to be a place of belonging. And actually, even now we have belonging as our kind of North Star. Like the most important thing anyone in our team should feel is that they belong at DECIEM. Whoever they are, whatever they believe in, like there is a place for them at DECIEM. And I think that really comes from this like sense of family. We would have taken a bullet for each other. And I think even now, like within DECIEM, we're 1,500 people now, but we still have so many of those early team members. But I think there was just so much love and passion. And again, Brandon cared for all of us. Like he had so much love that you gave it back. And that's where it was so difficult, when we went through the unthinkable and things became so difficult, because it wasn't a colleague. Like, you've just lived this incredible journey of us all traveling together, building something so special. Like, just this, such a sense of we're all in this together. Like, even when times are hard, like, we've got each other's backs and things may not work out, but actually let's just have fun, let's learn things, and let's just keep trying. Like, let's never be afraid to fail, and let's just do it together.
And in July of 2015, DECIEM launched their 7th brand. It was called Hylamide, and it was another skincare line, but it was designed to reach deeper into the lower layers of the skin. In Hylamide, there were 3 what they called series. There was the core series, which was daily treatments, the booster series to add something extra for specific needs, and then the finisher series with skin protecting properties like blurring, radiance, and photographic technologies. These products were a little less expensive than Niod, which kind of separated it there, and they played more to a customer who knew exactly what their problem was and wanted to target it. It also marketed to people who may have been a little intimidated by Niod's scientific marketing. Brand 8 came around the same time, and this one really caught me off guard. I was like, I had no idea that DECIEM came out with a brand like AB Crew. It was marketed towards stereotypical gym bros. They hired Bulgarian model and social media fitness influencer Lazar Angelov to be the face of the company. Not much is left of this brand, and I didn't know about it at the time. I feel like 2015 I should have known about this, but I didn't. So of course the Wayback Machine allowed me to kind of dig in and see what they offered over there and what the marketing was like. They had whey protein powder, they had shaving cream and self-tanner and caffeine shampoos. They also had a product that seemed to be inspired by or possibly the same technology as Inhibitif, but marketed to gym bros. And it was called the Hair Minimizing Body Hydrator. This was the description. If naked is not close enough and body hair gets in the way, we're here to help. Our super hydrator uses a mushroom derivative that offers lasting hydration from below the surface, while our plant proline complex minimizes the appearance of hair regrowth so you can show off your muscles better. Our aroma notes of young vetiver and forest woods add a subtle scent of masculine presence. I don't want to stay too long on AB Crew, but I do want to mention one other thing, because this description of their protein powder is so brand encoded. Like, once I dug deep into all of this and I really got to know Brandon's writing style and the way that he talked and watching interviews and things, this description just cracked me up. This is what it said about their ab carving protein. A super blend of 7 next generation purified proteins for immediate, in parentheses, super fast, and sustained, in parentheses, super slow, usability within the body. Translation: build better muscle right after your workout when you're sitting down bored at work, on your dinner date, and in your sleep. But it doesn't end there, because muscles look like more fat when they're covered with fat. So we've added a designer definition blend of fat and water retention fighters that will work hard to make you look ripped, so you can walk by the chubby pink guy in the Rolls Royce and feel great. And then it says, very important notes. 1, it goes without saying that we have included all the BCAAs, glutamine, and other super obvious stuff other proteins brag about. And 2, Rolls-Royce is a trademark someone owns. We're not associated with Rolls-Royce or the trademark owner. We put this note here in case they sue us. I love it. I love it. And it's funny because I actually ran this by my gym bro husband, who has his personal training certification. And he was like, I wish this brand still existed, because I would definitely be interested in buying some stuff. So things were chugging along at DECIEM, but they weren't at their 10 brand goal yet. The next brand was the most important brand that I personally think that DECIEM has ever launched, and it was a brand that they named The Ordinary. In 2016, when The Ordinary launched, Brandon and Nicola were taking a big risk. They decided to build on the sciencey names that they were using over at Naiad. But with The Ordinary, they wanted to focus on single ingredients that were science-based, that had been proven to work, but sell them as individual products or as very simple and effective combinations. Not only were these ingredients simple and science-backed, they were also very inexpensive. And because they were inexpensive for The Ordinary to buy, Brandon knew that he wanted them to be inexpensive for customers too. They launched 27 products at The Ordinary's launch, all coming in these little glass bottles. What's important to recognize is that The Ordinary was Brandon's big you to the skincare industry. That's exactly what it was. At this point, Brandon knew what ingredients were the ones that were working within these expensive skincare products that customers were being overcharged for. So he pulled those ingredients out and he sold them at a very inexpensive price. The theory was that customers were more likely to try a new product if there wasn't very much financial investment in it. All of The Ordinary's products were under $15, and some of them were even under $5, which was unheard of for something outside of a Dollar General. Brandon's theory was that once people put this small investment into these products and they tried them, they would learn quickly that these products actually worked and then invest in more and more and more of the different products from The Ordinary, create that brand loyalty and repeat customer purchases. As customers started repeatedly buying more products from The Ordinary, they would stop buying the expensive products that they were being overcharged for, essentially undercutting the entire market and taking a ton of customers away from the mass market.
You know, the way I think of it, because look, ultimately...
Is it the anti-BS range?
See, it's so much, I guess it's more pro-transparency range as opposed to anti-BS, because the way I would think of it, I mean, we're all people, we're all working very hard, and even though I don't believe in the values of some companies, I believe that there are good humans that are working hard to build them. And so the chemists that work in those labs all started with very good intentions. We all as humans want to make the world a better place. Except what happens is that you start doing your job and you want to be recognized for doing good work. And the way you're recognized is not the reaction of the consumer so much, but ultimately, or trying to develop the next molecule, but it's actually the reaction of what is the marketing team requiring, what should I do, what should I create? And so in a way you become a chemist whose role is not to find the next thing, but to simply appease the requirements of a marketing team. Now a marketing team looks at trends, which is all history, because trend is not about the future, to establish what should be developed. So in a way it just becomes this vicious circle of everyone has very good intentions, but nobody recognizes that it takes risk, it takes trial to ultimately just try to evolve the world a bit further. What to me is most interesting is that a lot of people think that The Ordinary is a dupe for something else that's more expensive. They only think that because the other one's more expensive. If The Ordinary was 10 times the price, people would think, oh, this is the best of everything. But it is the best of everything because it doesn't cost anymore to make sure the pH is correct. It doesn't cost anymore to make sure it's the best there is. But the price point, I mean, our margin, when I say our margin percentage is exactly the same across all our brands, it is the same across all our brands. You know, if you look at, let's say, a public company that's very big, it's got many, many brands, you can see their gross margins are in the top 80%. Now, that across all of our brands, that's not the case for us. Our gross margins are much lower because our products cost more to make and we're selling them for less. But then they spend a lot more money trying to market that product, whereas we spend. So, but if you look at the very bottom line, you'll see that those very big companies only have a 10% profit margin, which is very much just like ours. So in a way, we have all the same margins. It's just where it fits on the P&L. We're putting more into the product and less in the profit loss. And so in a way, I think it's more how are we using the consumer's money? We're all coming to the same bottom line.
You're putting all yours in research and not so much of it in marketing, advertising, and hiring supermodels.
Right, because what's actually happened is that those things are alienating the customer even more. Because the moment you try to market something, all the bars go up. But it allows people to try things. It allows people to see what their skin reacts to and what it doesn't react to well, because that's also a big part of it. But also has created this word of mouth that allows us not to invest so much into communicating about it. People are doing it for us. And so in a way, everybody seems to be benefiting from it.
One of the reasons I recommend The Ordinary as an entry line product to anybody is I say, well, you know, salicylic acid might not agree with you.
Absolutely.
Why not try The Ordinary, because that's not a big investment, and then you can then go up to the odd. That's what I use it
Absolutely.
for. I use it as almost like a tester sample for people.
Absolutely.
Because some people might not work well with high levels of vitamin C.
Absolutely.
So I use that as their kind of testing
I
ground.
completely agree.
The Ordinary was a huge project, and though DECIEM was doing well, they needed more money. And it seems like a choice they made right around this time, possibly to fund The Ordinary, was to sell their hair care line called Grow Gorgeous to the Hut Group. It was a UK-based company. They sold it to a UK-based parent company. To my knowledge, we don't know how much they sold for, but what we do know is that Grow Gorgeous had sales around 10 million to 20 million pounds when it was acquired. Another advantage that The Ordinary had, at least with American consumers, I don't know about other countries, but I know at this time, American consumers were obsessed with the K-Beauty 10-step skincare regimen. People were loving these more elaborate multi-step processes, and The Ordinary fit perfectly into this. And Brandon was so open, he told everybody exactly what he was doing and why. This was great. So he did this interview with Cosmetic Business. They asked him why DECIEM was labeled the abnormal beauty company. And he said that basically what they were doing was against anything seen as normal in the cosmetic industry. He said, business is made up of people and people are humans. When you take humanity out of business, which is the norm in the world, no matter how much success, there's much less fun and much less authenticity and ultimately much intangible value. And customers wanted it. I remember at the time The Ordinary was everywhere, all over social media. Anybody that was reviewing skincare at the time was talking about The Ordinary. I even did my own video on The Ordinary at the time. There was so much buzz about this brand that The Ordinary literally couldn't keep the products in stock. DECIEM was pushing out product as fast as they could, but they literally couldn't keep up with customer demand. There were always people complaining that they were trying to get their favorite Ordinary products and it was always out of stock. While everybody's trying to get a hold of the products from The Ordinary, DECIEM's launching 2 other brands. I'm not kidding. Right around the same time, 2 more brands launched under the DECIEM umbrella: STEM Hair Care and a collaboration with British homewares company, The White Company. And it was at this point Brandon and Nicola were like, okay, we need investors because this is getting out of control. We can't do this on our own anymore. We have to get some investors. They had this big investment firm come to them, really wanted to invest in the company, and they almost signed it. But Pasquale Cusino came in and was like, nope, before you do that, hold up, don't sign with them yet. I would like for you to meet my friend, Leonard Lauder. From Estee Lauder. And apparently they hit it off immediately. Here is an interview from January of 2018 with a beauty editor, Nadine Baggett. This is what he said about meeting Leonard Lauder.
My niece, Simone, is a vegetarian, vegan most of the time.
Right.
And she had a problem with the fact that you are now part of a company that sold into China.
But if you really look at, so first of all, we're really not part of the Estee Lauder companies. They're an investor. And so we are part of DECIEM. We are DECIEM. And money has come into the company. In fact, Estee Lauder came to the table very, very late, and they moved very quickly. And my first reaction to them is that, look, we don't want to be a part of a conglomerate. We can't really, our values are not the same. And it wasn't until I met Leonard Lauder and I literally fell in love with him that I didn't, that really was changed my mind. But if you look at, let's say, if we had moved forward with a private equity firm, no one would have raised any concern about animal testing.
No.
But I don't understand why, though, because those private equity firms have invested in brands and they made their money by selling those brands to companies like Estee Lauder and Unilever, and then they got that money to then invest back into companies. So ultimately, if your concern is around the fact that some people have done animal testing to bring products from Estee Lauder or Unilever into a market, then you have to recognize that it's the same flow of money that has gone to private equity firms that allows people to invest.
It's a global
thing. I think ultimately what we need to recognize is we control what we do. You cannot control what other people do. And the reason we don't do animal testing is I disagree with using animal testing as a method of establishing customer safety today. It doesn't make any sense.
So by the end of June of 2017, Estee Lauder had purchased 28% of DECIEM. And at this point, DECIEM had their 10 launched brands in place: The Ordinary, Niad, Hylamide, Inhibitif, the chemistry brand, STEM, Fountain, HIF, White RX, and AB Crew. There are 10 brands in place. They'd finally done it. They had launched 10 brands, not at once, but they had their 10 brands. It's important to note here that as minority investors, Estee Lauder didn't have a ton of control of what was going on over at The Ordinary or DECIEM as a whole. They were just the money, and they seemed to trust Brandon and Nicola completely. And Brandon and Nicola's next idea was for another one of those rabbit-sized holes in the market of lip care. The brand was called ESHO. In September of 2017, DECIEM launched ESHO with Dr. Tijan ESHO. Now, this doctor was not just some random doctor. He was a celebrity. He had appeared on the British reality TV show called Body Fixers, and he was well known for his work with lips, specifically lip augmentation. He coined the term the 3-point lip, and this was a formula that was supposed to guide you to the exact perfect size of the perfect lips. And he used Angelina Jolie as an example of what this looks like. Tijan was also known for creating this tool called Midas, and it was used by professionals who were doing lip augmentation. Basically what it was this bar, and it vibrated. And supposedly that helped to position the lips so that when injections were being done, the lips were in the right place. In an article I read, it said that the vibrating function paired with pressure and the cool feel of the bar was said to reduce sharp pain from the needle injections. The lip care line ESHO contained 3 products. The first one was formulated to plump lips without fillers. The second one was specifically to maintain lips that did have filler in them. And then the third one was a lip balm to nourish either kind of lips, filled or unfilled. Tijan was a huge fan of DECIEM and of Brandon, and he was so excited. He had said in an interview once that before he hooked up with DECIEM, he would go into Space NK, which is a store in the UK, and he would look at the shelves, and he would say to himself that one day he wanted to have a product with his name on it on those shelves, and that companies had been reaching out to him for years to try to get him to do some kind of skincare line or a lip care line, and it just didn't feel right. But because he was such a big fan of DECIEM, he knew that this was the brand that he wanted to partner with. Unfortunately, things did not go well in this partnership, and Tijan explained a little bit about what was going on. I think the first red flag for him was in the formulation process. He felt like that the whole process of formulating the products was rushed, and that he wasn't getting the information or the say in things that he thought he should. Here's a clip.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. ESHO here. I'm doing a different type of video today. It's one concerning DECIEM. I know a lot of you have had a lot of questions about what's happening at the company, what happened to my product line, and just general questions about Brandon. And, you know, I wanted to kind of put in a way that I answered all those questions, and that's why we decided to make this video today. Me and Brandon, where we came together is we formed a product line after my own namesake called ESHO. And it probably was a real dream for me because I was a big, and still am a big DECIEM fan, just as all of you are. So, you know, when you're there and you're having that, it's quite overwhelming because you go from having a product that you use in your own clinic, and then someone says, we're going to make it better and we're going to actually make this big line, it's going to be global. And you can't really imagine that. Imagine you as a DECIEM fan there watching this and someone comes to you and says, we're going to do that. It's very big. And to be fair, I gave a lot of trust, and, you know, I put all my trust in that because they had created all these formulations. I'd never done that before. I can create the concepts as a doctor. I'm not a formulator. So I had to give a lot of trust towards that side. And I remember a specific conversation with Brandon in his car, actually, that made me decide, you know, I'm going to go with him, was when we sat down, he said, look, this is a very daunting thing that's going to happen. You know, when we're putting your name, you know, it's part of you on there. But he said, you know, he'd been through things where people did him wrong, and that he would never do that to me. And that, you know, just know he would always be on my side. And I think it was at that moment I thought, right, okay, I'm going to sign. Now, when the line first started, it kind of, in a way, wasn't how I imagined. You know, obviously everything is crazy at DECIEM and they do things a certain way. Nicola is always the balance of the person in terms of structure. Brandon was always everywhere, firing back and forth. But it was good because I'm like that sometimes, but he took it to another level. And, you know, when we did bits, in terms of testing, you know, I would test some of the formulations, only some of them. And if I liked one, then it may have not been stable. And then I got told, oh no, we can't use that. It's not stable now. So it was very fast turnover. And I wasn't ever really sure where I was in the process. I was kind of catching up and following my tail while he was steaming ahead. And, you know, even when the product was released, I was like, I only found out at the same time you guys did. You know, I remember being in clinic and I wasn't even sure we were going forward with the final bit yet or what that was going to look like. And I was getting tagged in my Instagram, people going, oh my God, I bought this product, I bought this product. And I was like, what? You've got my product? Like, you know, I haven't even got my final product. And then, so I called Brandon and I was like, Brandon, you know, what's going on? You know, I didn't know it was getting released, you know, what's happening. He said, I'm sorry, as Brandon does, you know, spoke really fast and then said, you know, I'll sort it, but it's okay. Everybody loves it. So, you know, that was okay. So again, I kind of was reassured by that. You know, things happen very quickly. We were on QVC twice. We sold out twice on QVC. The product was selling out everywhere. But for me, my concern was I never had really any control. Even though I loved the process, I was the last to find out things all the time. And I don't think that was on purpose, but it was the way things were done.
The brand launches, and he said that the reviews on the products were mixed. And that really bothered him because he felt like he wasn't involved enough in that pre-launch process. And now it's on his name that these products are getting mixed reviews. He said he talked to Brandon about it and Brandon assured him and said, you know what, we can tweak the formulas. This is normal. Sometimes just products off the jump just don't get the best reviews, but we're going to tweak it. We're going to make it better. The launch of ESHO couldn't have come at a worse time in the timeline of DECIEM. We're going to pause Dr. ESHO's story for just a minute because something happens in December of 2017. Something very important, something I would say universe shifting in the DECIEM story. Late 2017, December of 2017 specifically, this is 3 months after ESHO launched. Brandon Truaxe, the mad genius behind DECIEM, the abnormal beauty company, is about to literally go mad. You know, the rabbit hole that Brandon was always looking for, you know, the one that the elephants couldn't fit in. That rabbit hole is about to turn into a similar rabbit hole to Alice from Alice in Wonderland. That rabbit hole that leads into the most nightmarish scenario of Wonderland that you can imagine. And the reason why it is so bad is because that trip down the rabbit hole will ultimately lead to Brandon's death. Because we're about to have a huge tone shift in this story, this is a good time to end part 1 of the extraordinary true story of the ordinary. I hope you'll stick with me. Make sure you subscribe so you know when part 2 goes up. I will get it up to you as soon as I possibly can. As you can imagine, a lot of time goes into making these videos. So as soon as I can possibly get it to you, it will be up. Thank you so much for watching. Mad love to you. I'll see you soon.